The dry season always brings about interest in titles that really wouldn't garner them otherwise. With people still chomping at the bit for the long overdue proper English releases of Blade and Soul, Phantasy Star Online 2, and Black Desert, the market will always go looking for the occasional distraction. One of the more baffling bouts of this fervor came for this game. I understand some people have interest in the aesthetics over anything else, as well as something that can go back to basics, and you really can't get much more back to basics than this game. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at Echo of Soul. Echo of Soul is a standard fantasy world MMO that's about as standard fantasy world MMO as you can get. Korean design philosophy? Check. Basic sword and sorcery class structure? Check. Go here, kill this quest lines? Check. You've seen this all before, trust me. Published by Aeria Games, and the only title currently developed by the Korean developer Envious, Echo of Soul was released to the US in May of 2015, but was initially created and published in Korea in late 2013. I'm not sure why Aeria Games decided to pick this up in the current market, even with their touted award of Most Anticipated MMO of 2015. Who the hell gave them that clearly subjective acclaim? Sean Edwards Fox TV? Oh, them? Yeah, this is gonna be a thing. We're in a weird middle ground here regarding the graphics. This isn't a game that looks terrible, but it by no means looks great either. Nothing about these graphics really push the envelope. Models are fine, but textures range in quality, and a lot of lifeless filler was used in larger parts of the environments, which, oddly enough, also vary from ho-hum fantasy forest to some pretty cool-looking locales. And sometimes a trip of several feet could cause that switch. Design dissonance is all over the place, and armchair geoscientists will be tossing their monitors out the window when they step past a volcanic lava zone into a lush, breezy meadow. It's still not as ridiculous as WoW's original Outland model, but it's pretty much the same idea. Step through a portal from the desert, you're in Swamp World now. The animations seem okay, but that might depend greatly on your class. I found the archer movements very stiff and mechanical, which is why I immediately re-rolled to the Guardian class, which is far more flash and fluid-looking movements. A similar reason for the switch is the tone of impact in combat, which is also dependent on classes. Many who rolled up a warrior claimed the class felt oddly stiff and weak for their intended purposes, and as an archer I felt more like I was lobbing wiffle balls at a target, but then again, something about the Guardian's flashy staff moves and power hits made the class feel much more fun for me to play. As fun as a stand and hack system will allow, but we'll get into that. Cities have that old issue of being overly populated and therefore causing your frame rate to tank. Echo is bringing back all the classics, I guess. Oddly, the game seems to run far smoother than many recent games I've played, but the frame rate seems very chaotic at times. You know that thing I hate? You know the one. I complained about it like several times, even wrote up an article for it. Echo of Soul is crawling with it. Jokey quest names. Everywhere. If you love puns and shoehorned references, killing any possible sense of immersion you might have, look no further than this game. It's nearly non-stop the entire time you play, and one of the more particularly shameless shoehorns comes in from the form of a 50 Shades of Grey reference. Why? Because in that particular quest, you have to use a rope to tie up one of your enemies. No, I'm done. The music's just fine, though like much of the rest of the product, it isn't very noticeable and comes across as just generic. You have all the classics here: Fantasy Forest theme, Combat 1, Danger theme, Mystery Fantasy theme of mystery, and my personal favorite, Combat 4. There's still plenty of good orchestrations and choir-backed tracks, but this all seems to take a backseat to the action, and sounds a lot better outside of the game. To be fair though, the soul buff theme that plays when you use your soul skill is pretty good. Sound design itself is okay. There are some impactful sounds here and there, and in general the sounds do make up for the lack of feedback from animations and visuals, but nothing stands out here as well. If you've heard one sword slash or dagger thrust from any other game, you've heard them in this game. That is until you get to the voice acting, which is oh so wonderfully awful. It's another one of those gems of acting that sounds like the dry run, but then they just decided that was good enough. After all, time is money, and who's got the time to do multiple takes and read-throughs? Read-throughs! Sorry, probably should have done a second take of that. To start out, all classes within the game are gender-locked and done so in the laziest manner possible. This is a bit of an issue of degrees, as we tend to find MMOs that offer full customization the best, but barring that, if you're gonna gender and body lock your classes, then please have a good story reason for doing so. Here we just have the worst example. There is no story reason and no individual quest chains. It actually hinders the customization of the characters, possibly just because the developers felt like being lazy. That customization is very odd as well, giving you lots of customization and little to no customization at the exact same time. Even having some options locked to specific classes, even if they are the same gender. Why characters can't have the same eyes is beyond me. It's not like they perceive the world differently. This is actually the reason Grindstone member Drusker chose to be a warrior as opposed to a rogue, and that was a decision that came back to haunt him. The classes themselves are previously mentioned warrior, who can become a berserker or protector, which both use two-handed swords. The rogue can become an assassin or duelist, the guardian, who can become a stormguard or earthguard, the lowly sorceress, who can become an ice mage or fire mage, and finally the archer, who can become a huntress or a bard. It should be noted that you don't need to fret too much over which secondary class you pick, as you'll unlock both by the time you hit level 20. You may have noticed that there's no healer class within the game, instead having everyone act as a healer of sorts by using healing scrolls on themselves and others. As you can imagine, this is a very awkward way to remove the Trinity from within the game, but at least it comes off better than Guild Wars 2's fumbling attempt. When starting out, you'll be dropped into a small village under assault by monsters, and tasked with clearing out the area to secure the position. You'll immediately notice just how bog standard this game is, with the usual exclamation marks for quests, question marks for turn-ins, NPCs that send you to other NPCs that are barely 10 feet away, kill quests, escort quests, gathering quests. Basically, if you have the generic MMO playbook, you can follow along with this game word for word, and the game often reuses the exact same quest layouts throughout it, sometimes with the exact same enemy types. This will also be your introduction to combat, which is very much stand and hack to the extreme, not allowing you to do anything until your awkward animations are finished. This makes the combat feel incredibly stiff, which isn't helped by the game's animation quality, and to top it off, the entire game's combat is lacking any sort of impact or depth. There's decent sound work, but some of the animations will give off the sense that your attack has weight to it, but the enemy has no reaction to anything you do, standing there performing their own attacks that also don't impact you all that much outside of a massively telegraphed attack. This is one of the many reasons why playing as a warrior or archer feels like such a boring slog, as their combat isn't really interesting, and with a lockdown when using skills, you feel awkward and clumsy when you're trying to position for combat. Honestly, there's no reason a game like this should even use this system in this day and age. Hell, even Warhammer Online didn't have stand and hack combat, and that helped to make the game feel more active. Strangely enough, it feels like most of the effort went into the fully voiced emotes, as they are rather amusing, played for laughs, and have the usual over-exaggeration for emphasis found in most anime. Why some of this effort couldn't be spent polishing up other areas is a bit of a mystery, but kudos to whoever made the emotes. Another area of the game that does well is the idea that your actions have impact on the world and storyline, even if said story isn't all that good. Rather than the standard Warcraft mindset that sees areas stay in the exact same before and after doing quests, Echo of Soul heavily utilizes instancing, and while it's not as smooth as Elder Scrolls Online, it's nice to actually see that saving a village from a siege means you actually stopped that siege. There's another unique feature of the game, taking the form of Chaos Souls that you'll collect from killing enemies. These various soul types can then be purified, in either solo, which will give you the least amount, or cooperatively with another player that leads into another issue that we'll discuss later. You can choose to use these souls in crafting as well through the soul skills, activated with a T key, which seems to be the best option, as said skills need to be leveled up individually anyway, though don't feel bad if you forget these even exist. The soul skills come in red, green, blue, and yellow, varieties with associated buffs and stats for each. Red will increase your attack speed, and your casting speed, and experience gain for 30 seconds while it's active. Green will increase your max HP by 30% for 15 seconds, removing all disables and making you immune to disabling effects for 2 seconds, while also giving you experience gain. Blue will increase your defense and PvP defense stats by 30% for 15 seconds and grant you increased experience. And lastly, yellow will increase your critical accuracy and piercing by 10%, increased attack speed and casting speed by 15%, and give you increased experience gains, but only for 15 seconds. While you're traveling throughout the world, you'll find gems and rune, either from opening the various loot containers that enemies will drop, or getting special quest rewards. These are used to give stat increases and special properties to weapons, armor, and jewelry, though runes can only be used in weapons and jewelry. You can upgrade the gems by combining two of the same type to make a more powerful gem. Though this claims to have a failure chance, yet I've yet to fail at it, but you will end up taking lots of inventory space up if you collect all these gems. Inventory within the game is rather limited in a sense that you can quickly become flooded with items that you'll need to be disposed of. Sure, you'll get some bags along your journey, but these barely keep up with inventory concerns, especially once you hit max level and need to keep two separate sets for PvP and PvE. Essentially, you'll be triaging items constantly, and this is where you'll run into a curious oddity. Everything sells for only 1 silver. Nearly everything purchases for only 1 silver. There's no exceptions until you hit level 60. What I see here is a game that seems kind of embarrassed by its early game, so much so that Aeria went in and decided to just push everything towards the end game, making leveling just this straight shot and making everything only cost 1 silver. It's weird because once you reach level 60, there's really not any reason to have been rushed there. Once at 60, you'll earn more money towards your items, but everything also becomes ludicrously expensive, making it almost a moot point. Add to this the fact that you can have a crafting profession, but funnily enough, only one is allowed, so you'll need alts and friends to get the necessary materials for you, and you can quickly see why bag space gets incredibly tight. So, having to rely on other people to do the simplest crafting tasks, is that a recipe for disaster? The community is sparse. Now, we're not saying that this game is abandoned by any means, but you will find more players later in the game, but it isn't exactly swimming in tons of players. What it is drowning in, however, is gold spammers, and they seem to be literally everywhere, shouting in every region, in every channel, and just in general being that annoying menace that you see in most MMOs that don't purge them constantly. Funnily enough, the game also has the usual chat filter system found in Asian MMOs, and will censor the most seemingly innocuous words because some letters within that word are part of bad words. Even with this filter, yes it can be shut off, you will still find people using odd phrases and shuffling of letters to insult each other. Now, if you want to group up, there is a nice amount of content for you, ranging from party mobs that are easily defeated in groups, or randomly spawning co-op monsters that usually have an associated quest with them, to the usual flavor of dungeons. Sadly, there are only 5 traditional group-style dungeons throughout the entire game, and they aren't all that special, though they do highlight a larger issue of the community. See, if you decide to use the group finder to get a proper dungeon run going in hero mode, to hopefully earn better gear and experience, you can expect the majority of runs to come to a screeching halt as the party leader kicks everyone for the lulz. This is a major and rampant issue, with people doing this to waste time and laugh at the misfortune of people trying to play the game. Yep, it's one of those communities. So perhaps you'd prefer to do the PvP and maybe get some revenge against the usual channers and trolls that infest the game. Well, surprisingly, the PvP has some entertaining twists, giving you a couple different game modes to play instead of doing a straight-up team versus team brawl. The 2 game modes come with their own maps and are as follows. There's a straight-up League of Legends Dominion map following exactly what your mind thinks of when hearing that phrase, and a 5-lane resource grab where crystals will spawn at the center of 5 lanes at random through shrinking intervals as time goes on, and they'll require some teamwork to succeed. Though here too is an issue, as classes with lots of stuns or massive burst damage will dominate the PvP, and it quickly becomes extremely frustrating to even bother with queuing up. Then of course we have the bog standard guild system, requiring you to earn 1 gold, which equates to up to 1,000 silver, so you'd better get saving up, and then finding a guild NPC to register with. As members in the guild gain experience, they also help to level up the guild itself, which grants different benefits to its members, making it extremely useful to join up with larger guilds that can rake in more experience quickly. Though do be warned, if you leave your guild or are kicked at any time, you'll have a debuff that prevents you from joining another guild for an hour. And of course with this community you can rest assured there's plenty of spam invites going around. Still, never understood why someone would join a spam guild. By definition they'd have no standards or substance within them. So with the community out of the way, and the game being your usual generic Korean MMO, does the cash shop follow suit? This will be an odd section to say the least. For starters, the developers seem like they don't want you to spend money on the game, or even looking at the cash shop itself. To access said cash shop, the game will proclaim you simply need to depress the A and C keys. But when you try this, nothing happens. Well, it turns out A and C actually means Alt and C, but the weirdness doesn't stop there. Some have noted that when you make your first purchase with Aeria Games, your account will be suspended and require you to contact support to get it unfrozen. That isn't really an issue of Echo of Soul per se, but because it uses the Aeria system, it's something to be wary of. This is odd enough because the game certainly wants you to venture in there. In more than a few free-to-play MMOs, there's occasionally a quest that'll ask you to retrieve an item from the cash shop. This is usually that game's way of getting you to check the place out, and the item in question is usually listed as free or for a small fee of in-game cash, or at least the game will grant you a small amount of points required to buy it. Not Echo of Soul. There are entire quest lists that ask you to buy cash shop items, and these items will go for full price. I was more than a bit miffed when I found this out, but they can be easily ignored. The currency exchange for the cash shop is a simple $1 to 100 points and comes in $5, $10, $25, $50, and $100 increments, making finding the value of items in the cash shop far easier than games with rampant Microsoft point syndrome. The cash shop, however, is very barren, with only a handful of cosmetic items and small bits of convenience that range from the $5 to $10 in pricing. And honestly, it doesn't look like anything special. It doesn't help the cosmetics are the exact same things you can earn in-game with just different colors. You could spend your points on mounts, but these are incredibly overpriced for a barely noticeable movement speed increase. And the one mount that looks interesting will require $30, so it's not really something that'll catch many players' eyes. All in all, not a place you'll likely have any reason to stop by, unless you're being forced to. While run-of-the-mill is the name of the game here, nothing about this game really offends me. But there is a dictionary definition of unremarkable, and this game is more than fitting of that definition. Nothing surprising or interesting exists within this game that'll have you desperate enough to try it out for yourself. However, this has been one of the easiest games for me to play. Putting myself on autopilot and just firing up an internet video or podcast or even a TV show I've been looking to catch up on was entirely doable. I could just coast from A to B without much thought about what I was supposed to be doing. And while I understand that can be a major minus to a lot of people, sometimes simplicity is all you're looking for. Here's my final rating. Those who want to play an MMO that doesn't try pulling too many surprises, Echo of Soul might work out just fine for you. It is a back-to-basics approach that might prove suitable for those looking for more of a classic Korean-style MMO. If there's one thing that EOS does differently to the point of interesting, the PvP matches borrowing pages from modern MOBA games isn't a bad start. While quite polarizing to some of Grindstone, the point capture was pretty tense, and the resource gathering, while far less exciting, did lend to more team dynamics than everyone just meet in the middle and kill each other kind of arena play that's been saturating this kind of game for way too long. I think Aeria is somewhat aware of the potential this game had to be a grinder, and never have I seen a game try so hard to push you to max level and make the leveling process of even crafting simplistic. Having the entire market cost 1 silver for everything makes money gathering pointless early game, and doesn't force you to grind cash on top of levels to stay current. I suppose I can appreciate that. I don't see any reason to look in here for now. The cosmetics aren't all that flashy unless you want to look like Kamina for some reason. Mounts in turn are much more useful, to the point of having almost a pay-to-win style advantage for PvP matches, but beyond that, you're gonna get through the main game without bothering to notice the shop is even here. Unless you end up gathering those cash shop items quests, but the less said about that the better. If there was an MMO called Generic Fantasy Online, it would look a lot like Echo of Soul. Same fantasy style, faux medieval architecture and biomes, same basic fantasy classes. Nothing about the game bothers to set itself apart from every game styled like this. The gameplay itself exacerbates this further, rehashing some of the most basic stand-and-hack combat tropes. Your moves and skills will trap you in place, and everything feels like you're just trading blows. It takes no effort to play as long as you can keep an eye on your health. Death will only come in the most BS of situations. I've soloed free-for-all area bosses, for God's sake. If you like quests that consist of go here, kill this, then Echo of Soul does not disappoint. While I understand that the argument can be made for this kind of thing existing within the genre's base formula, Echo of Soul does nothing to change that up, or even try to mask it. This leads to a very familiar and frankly tired formula that, while nothing inherently wrong with it, won't be grabbing the attention of jaded MMO vets. New to the genre and don't want to try too hard to advance? Try this. Everyone else, give it a lot more thought. Next time, we're looking at a game that garnered a lot of our attention when we were doing it as a recent side quest, but now that it's gaining a lot more attention in the market, we figured it might be time for a full review. People asked me to look at this game. I just want everyone to remember this. Left window will take you to my previous MMO Grinder episode on Blizzard's Hero of the Storm, while the right side window will get you a preview of Dark Nexus Arena, described by commenters as, "God damn it, not another MOBA." In the unlikely event you're new to my channel and this video brought you here, you can check out more of the page and keep up with new uploads by subscribing. Want to know how Grindstone really felt about this title? Check out the posting on my personal site at mmogrinder.net. If you want to support the show with actual cash for some weird reason, I do that Patreon thing nowadays all the tubers are into. So stop by patreon.com/MMO Grinder if you want to shriek in horror regarding how much people are willing to give me for this phoned-in garbage. Then, you know, Twitter at ChaosD1 and at MMO_Grinder and all that. There's those too. Once again, I encourage you to check out Slipstream's Twitch channel at twitch.tv/SlipstreamX14. Also remember to check out his personal blog about game development over at mindofthenewbiedev.tumblr.com. Also, if you happen to be attending Gen Con, Slipstream will be there as well to rep his game as well as Grindstone. He'll probably be the only person there wearing an MMO Grinder shirt. I didn't tell him to wear it. It was his idea, I swear.